Have a good meeting.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm Sage Turner, your chair and city councilwoman for Asheville. I'd like to welcome you to the June 24th, 2021 Asheville Regional Housing Consortium meeting. Thank you for being here today. All committee members and staff are participating virtually. We appreciate your patience as we work through committee meetings in a bit different way. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city's website, and also linked on this committee's page. We also have an option for the public to listen in and comment live by phone. You can dial 855-925-2801, and the meeting code is 8763. For those of you out there listening with us today, welcome. I'm going to do a quick roll call of everyone. Let's see, please make sure to mute your microphone unless you are not speaking throughout this meeting so we can kind of keep the background noise down. And as I call your name, if you could unmute and let us know that you are here. Let me get to the list here. Okay, I'm going to go off the agenda's order of committee members. So I myself am here. How about Ben Woody?
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. Jessica Trotman? Jessica, are you with us today? Okay. Matthew Cable?
Here.
Okay. Thank you. Andrew Mayrone? Andrew, are you here with us? I think I just saw him join. Hey, Andrew, we're doing roll call. Are you here? Okay, we're going to come back to him. He must be still getting his sound going. Alderman Archie Pertiller? I thought I saw him somewhere.
Here.
Thank you. Robin Merrill, our vice chair.
Here.
Sonia Flynn.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Great. Let's see, Barbara Volk. Okay, maybe not Barbara. William High. William? No? Alan McNeil?
Here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Norris Gentry?
It's actually for Madison County, Forest Gillum. I'm their rep.
I have a Madison County, so I have you too. So Norris Gentry is no longer?
He's designated me before the last meeting. So yeah.
Okay. And then, you'll see on our agenda, we have our roster. We want to go through and make sure it's accurate. So we'll do that a little. How about Karen Kina? I see you, Karen, but I can't hear you.
Karen Kina.
Kina, thank you.
Yes.
Still learning. Okay. Eric Rufa.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, Eric. Alex Carmichael. Alex. Caitlin Finkel.
Here, good morning.
Good morning. Kate Hayes.
I'm here.
Jonathan Griffin.
And Jonathan can be removed from our list.
Okay, so we'll do a little roster work.
Perfect.
Did I miss anyone? Okay, we also have some staff with us. We'll announce them as they begin speaking on items. Okay, so Andrew Mayrone, you were logging in, but I do see you here. You may not have heard your roll call, but I see you present. You are muted. Okay, he's talking to someone. I see Andrew, he is here. All right, thanks everyone. Okay, so first up,
Sage, I apologize. Yes. William High stepped in as well and said that he's been kicked out a few times. Is everyone else here? Are there any other technical issues that are preventing people from?
No.
Do we have enough? Okay, maybe it's a Buncombe County computer thing.
Okay, we can give him a minute to rejoin if he likes, or maybe, nope, I see him again. Okay, so William High is trying to be present. We'll mark him as present for now unless he continues to have problems. Okay, so first up on the agenda, and for those of you listening at home, I will go through the agenda and announce each item so you can follow along. We're at item 1, the framework for meeting and Google Meets. I'm actually not clear if there was someone on staff that wanted to explain this agenda item, but it is not one that I created. Does someone know why Paul, are you here?
Hi, Sage. I think that's just a placeholder. Paul D'Angelo here with Community Development, City of Asheville. That's just a placeholder for your kind of script on how these meetings are working. So just that placeholder.
I didn't think so. Okay. All right. So up next, we have item 2, the approval of minutes for the last 2 meetings. So we have January 11th and March 25th, and we'll do them one at a time. So January 11th, did everyone have a chance to read the minutes? Are there any comments, revisions? I see William is still having trouble. If there are no comments, revisions, changes, if I could get a motion.
Motion to approve.
That was Alan McNeil. Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Was that Ben? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, and I believe I have to do a roll call vote for each of these items, y'all. I'm going to go across my screen here. How about that? That'll be easy. Archie.
Aye, yes.
Caitlin.
Approve.
Matthew.
Approve.
Jacob. He froze a little. Jacob, did you reply? Jacob is frozen on my end. I hope we're not having technical issues. How about Ben Woody?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Alan?
Approve.
Kate?
Approved.
Sonia?
Approved.
Forrest?
Approved.
Robin?
Approved.
Andrew?
Aye.
Let's see, who else? Karen?
Approved.
Okay, and I think we lost William, and I think I got everyone. If I didn't get you, speak up now. Okay, you know, we will begin meeting again in person in the future, and we won't have these roll call votes, but let's move on to the next one, March 25th. So any changes, addendums, questions about that particular meeting minutes? If none, may I get a motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay, that was Sonia. How about a second?
Second.
That was Archie. Great. Okay, we're going to do a roll call. Archie, you're up first again.
Approve.
Caitlin.
Approve.
Matthew.
Approve.
Ben.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
Alan.
Approve.
Kate.
Yes.
Sonia.
Approve.
Forrest.
Approved.
Robin.
Approve.
Andrew.
Approve.
And William. Oh, he's out again. I'm so
Approve.
sorry, William. Oh, maybe he's called. Jacob.
Approved.
Okay, great. We have approved
You
the
missed
minutes.
Karen.
Oh, Karen. Sorry, Karen.
Approved.
Okay. I think because your video is not on. All right. Thank you, everyone, for that. So now we're going to go to membership. So you can see that this Google Sheet is attached. So I heard a couple things, and I assume maybe Christina, maybe you can adjust these in real time. I'm not sure who owns that sheet. So if you who spoke up earlier to say that we had replaced someone? There were 2 people.
I know I did for Madison County, but the roster is correct in showing my name. It's just the agenda was a mistake. Yeah, so we're good there.
Okay, perfect.
And the roster was correct for Transylvania too. I just want to clarify because I've gotten some conflicting information. So if the population threshold is 35, then we can have 2 members. But if it's higher than that, then I would be an alternate, I guess.
Okay. I'm not sure. That's what that says, though. Yeah. Board of directors, over 35,000 population, 1 alternate. Yes.
So according to the last census count, Transylvania County did not have 35,000 population. So I don't know what count we're basing off of, or until we get the 2020 census count, if that's what we're using. So if we don't have 2 voting members, Kate would be our alternate.
Okay. Okay, and let's see. Did everybody get a good check on their personal information? Any other changes that we need to see here or updates?
And sorry, one other update. I'm no longer the interim planning director. I've been moved to just the planning director. But
Well, congratulations.
thank you.
Also, Sage, instead of alderman, we are now council members.
Oh.
Council member.
Okay.
For my listing, the zip code is incorrect. It should be 28802.
Okay. Christina, are
So-
you updating this? Is anybody able to update this in real time?
Hi,
Yeah,
this is
Christina will
here.
be.
Yeah, I see it. I'm trying to pull it up. My computer's going kind of slow because I'm running
Okay.
the meeting through it. Sorry.
Okay. Well, luckily we're recorded, so we can always go back and update from the recording.
Of course.
Any other
And
changes?
this is why, Sage Paul here with the city, this is why we have this attached every month. A lot of stuff changes and all that, so we really like that everyone is taking a look at that, so we have a always updated and current list. And there's some information at the bottom of the agenda on how to, if somebody's going to switch, like how to properly do that with the letter and all that. It's at the bottom of the agenda, just FYI, but thanks everybody for updating and looking at the info.
Okay, great. All right. Any other changes we want to say real quick while we're doing this? Okay, great. Thank you for that. We have completed item 2 on the agenda. We're moving on to number 3, updates and news. Up first, we have the 2021, 24, 25 plan priorities. And let's see. Has everybody had a chance to look at this? Staff, did you want to speak to this at all, or we just kind of go for an update here?
This is just a informational way to share that those are our priorities that we focus on from the 5-year consolidated plan, the high priorities and low priorities. So as we're always thinking of funding decisions in the future, we're remembering those. Staff created just this simple thing for us, and we just thought we'd share it out.
Okay, great. It is nice to see it that simply put. Any questions while we have this document in front of us for staff, or our history of how we got here in these plan priorities? Okay. Another update, item B, under number 3, is the new home consortium forming.
So just a informational sharing here that we're hearing other consortiums forming. So I think Haywood County is looking at some surrounding counties around their area and looking to form a consortium, and I've already talked to HUD and our HUD rep about that. So just an FYI. And then there was talk of Rutherfordton wanting to possibly join our consortium, but they are now working with the folks down in Gastonia and I think Polk County in that direction to possibly form one in the future, but just discussions happening. So we may have a few new or expanding consortiums surrounding ours. So just an FYI.
So new and separate consortiums, not necessarily adding to this one, but possibly some that want to add to this one, right?
Possibly, but it seems like Rutherford's going further south or east.
Okay. Okay. Any questions or comments about that? All right, moving right along. Number 3, item C, Pj Sub Recipient Monitoring.
Sure. So I'm going to flip it over to Mary Brooke Cox, our CD analyst, just to talk about our role as a participating jurisdiction to do our own subrecipient home monitoring. Mary Brooke will have a brief update, and then we'll have more as we're completing that work right now.
Yeah.
Mary Brooke.
Good morning, everyone. Mary Brooke Cox, Community Development Analyst. So I'm sure many of you know, but the HOME program does require participating jurisdictions to monitor our subrecipients. So we are working to develop an annual monitoring plan to meet those requirements. This spring, staff conducted a risk assessment on all home-funded projects for the last 3 program years. And from those, we selected 5 projects to monitor. We are still actively monitoring, but we'll provide a more detailed update in September.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, item D, home-funded projects.
Sure. The consortium had asked to kind of just see where the balance was of some of our home funding and previous projects. So that's kind of a part of our normal agenda items now for information sharing. And so we updated those for this meeting.
Okay, and I had done a little additional math. It looked like about 25% of the funding had been used. Right, let's see, I totaled it up. So of the 3.47 million, 2.6 million remains to be tapped, and 861,000 has been utilized, and that is 24.8%. So that's a heads up.
Chairman Turner,
Yes.
can I step back to the audit issues? As I understand that, is city staff is conducting an internal audit, but this is not an audit in conjunction with HUD or a formal audit. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, and I didn't see your hand up at first. You're asking about the audit and whether or not it's
Yeah, I'm asking about the nature
internal?
of the audit. So as I understand, as Mayor Vick described, city staff will conduct annual monitoring, but this is not a formal HUD audit. Is that correct?
HUD is not monitoring the city's funding right now. That is correct. We are just proactively looking at our subrecipients to ensure policies are being followed and as part of the regular grant administration work.
Any additional questions, Andrew? Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that.
But I do, if we're now on to the funded projects, can we pause here and have some discussion and get a bit of an update on, yeah, I'm glad to see that some of these projects are moving, but we've had discussions in the past about the need for rental assistance. And I'm wondering if any of the city staff could kind of update us on, for example, the Housing Authority, TBRA funds, particularly look like the ones that aren't moving. And I'm curious what's the issue with that? I know this is a big issue in many of our communities, keeping folks housed, and would like to get a better description of particularly those.
Unfortunately, Brian Husky and Emily couldn't join us this morning, but the major thing that we're hearing is finding landlords to accept tenant-based rental assistance is a problem of accepting, and that seems to be the problem in the movement right now.
It's been an ongoing problem. I'm so sorry about that background noise. Sorry. Yeah, it's been an ongoing problem. I've heard for years, right? This is not a new problem. I don't know. I know there are some initiatives in the community to improve education and to seek out landlords and initiatives to improve those relationships. And even, is everyone familiar with Thrive that's operating in Asheville? I see some head nods. So that's a program. It's a nonprofit that started and recognized this as an issue and has been working to contact landlords and connect landlords with tenants and working with the Housing Authority and trying to they got some gap funding even to cover what the voucher pays and market rent. So that little bit extra, they received some grant money to close that gap and to work with the landlords. So that's one example. It's an ongoing problem in the community, and if there are any ideas around solving it, we should be having that discussion in general.
Yeah, and Chairman Turner, I apologize, Paul.
Sorry, if anyone's on from Homeward Bound, I know that they got foundation funding, I believe, specifically for a person to try to bridge that gap. And they're also working to kind of coordinate the efforts, but again, still seems to be a struggle overall, and that position just happened. WLOS is working on a voucher story to talk about the need for the community to be a part of the solution, and landlords, particularly some of the smaller ones or even larger apartment complexes, accepting vouchers. So they're working on a story, I know, and then otherwise the coordination with Homeward Bound, but still working.
I did also recently see, I'm sorry, Andrew.
Yeah.
I did also recently see that the Housing Authority was looking at an initiative to improve the voucher, the gap after the voucher between market rate. And go ahead, Andrew. What's your
I was
question?
going to say, maybe this is an item that we can put a pin in for future discussions and perhaps get kind of ongoing updates from city staff, because I know there was an emphasis in our spring meeting to push a lot of these funds towards rental assistance. And then I'm sure we'll get to it later, it looks like there's still an ongoing policy issue with kind of setting a floor of 20% of our award to go to rental assistance. But if those funds aren't actually being able to be used despite, the need in the community, that's something we need to be aware of. It would help us make informed decisions for future funding cycles. If, for example, if the Housing Authority still has 2 or 3 contracts outstanding, we'd love to see them use those funds, but perhaps we direct funds to something that can be more immediately useful. But it is an issue of concern, the lack of movement on that. And of course, every community struggles with it.
It is. And, just here in Asheville, I'll let you know on Tuesday of this week, we had a council meeting, and we voted on and approved a amendment to our Luigi policy, our land use incentive grant, where before it had been for new construction. So if you were constructing, you were coming to the city, you could receive incentive dollars in the form of a property tax rebate, like a synthetic TIF basically, to include and incorporate affordability into your project with a percentage required to accept vouchers. So that was the old way, and that way still exists, but we have expanded it to existing landlords as of Tuesday. So now if you own a 4-plex, an 8-plex, 150 apartments, and you wish to seek property tax rebate, you can come to us and request that with a certain percentage of affordability. And I believe what we approved is it must be 20% of units, and then half of those units must accept vouchers. So I'm sharing this because all of our communities, as we look at this voucher acceptance, I don't want to say failure, but we return about half of the funds every year in our community, that we need to keep our eyes open how each of our areas and regions and cities is operating. And that's been a really big move for our city. So I'd encourage your cities to look at it as well. But thanks. And I think it's a good idea to brainstorm on this on the future. Anyone else have a comment?
Just really quickly, this is Mary Brooke Cox again to address Andrew's concerns with tenant-based rental assistance and those funds flowing. Those funds are actually moving pretty well despite there being a lot of money in rental assistance. So the Housing Authority is currently submitting draw requests for their 18-19 contract. That will be closed out soon. If you'll remember, there was a delay in the city getting the 19-20 funds. So we just now are sending contracts to Homeward Bound for their city and county tenant-based rental assistance. So a lot of that is more of a HUD delay, and we're trying to get contracts signed and executed so they can draw down. So it's kind of a little bit of a timing thing there. And then just further, there's also rental assistance money in the CDBG CV funds that Homeward Bound and Pisgah is doing a really great job of moving.
It's a great reminder, Mary Brooke. Thank you. And I mean, this might be the first time in my history in this city that we've had so much rental assistance available. So, kudos for that. But we have to be especially stringent in our review and maintenance and, getting updates on how it's being spent. So good questions today. Anyone else on this subject before we keep moving?
Sage, this is Matt Cable. I just wanted to potentially pose an item for an upcoming meeting where we discuss particularly, I think the impetus of this group is to try to get funding out as quickly as possible. And we understand that, there are delays from HUD, there are things that happen that create delays, but we probably need to look at what point we as a group and through a policy may be able to rescind allocations from prior years and take those back and reallocate, or how that process works. I hate for funding to be stuck and the staff of the consortium not have an ability to come back to us and say, what do we do with this? How do we move this project forward? One of the comments is that they aren't able to reach one of the recipients, right? Like they can't even reach that individual. And so I think maybe we look at, what if the staff could bring back to us at a future meeting, what parameters they have to make adjustments, how we would reallocate funding if we can, and have a discussion about, at what point we would want to have those conversations, so that we're not focusing on individual projects, but kind of looking at it holistically. I think all of us, when we look at this list, are thinking we have so much need and we still have money from 17 and 18 that hasn't been expended, right? Like we could have potentially impacted a project now with that funding. And again, it's nothing against the applicant. It's just what processes do we have in place? If we could visit that at a future meeting, I think that would be great.
I think that's a great idea, Matthew. We've been dealing with that in other areas of funding with our housing trust fund and stuff. And what happens when a project falls apart and simply can't continue? And how do we receive that money back in a diligent and timely manner to be repurposed? So I think that's a great idea, and I'll record that for a future agenda item. Any other questions, comments about this?
One thing I meant to add, I'm sorry, is just when we do future allocations, if there are some time parameters too, that might be helpful. Like if we're allocating and we kind of set, this is when we expect it to be, or you're going to be up for reallocation. So if we can kind of set it up front for the next rounds of allocations of an expectation of expenditure. So that way maybe we have a break point for the new projects while we figure out how to deal with the projects that are sitting and not moving from the past. Thank you.
Sure. Great items for the discussion when it's on the agenda. So I appreciate that. Okay, I believe we are done now with item 3 and moving on to item 4, old business. And we've got a HUD environmental review update. I know if you haven't seen the email from me that was shortly before this meeting, I do request that you look at it, but it pertained to some of this. So I know folks have a lot of things to share on this. So has everyone been able to read the update? City staff, did you want to share anything particularly? Or anything to add?
So we have this since our monitoring with HUD, I think back in October of 2019, we have worked through all of our issues. The one that was remaining back in January is still Dodd Meadows, and trying to move them forward with their project. Speaking about older funds that are still sitting out there and trying to work with our Habitat friends down there in Henderson. And then for the city's plan, which I think is the item for discussion, that when it comes to full environmental assessments, we're kind of offering 2 options. One is that the developer can work with their environmental group that they already have for their phase 1. When an environmental assessment is done in coordination with a phase 1, it's more efficient and it's cheaper for the developer to move forward. We, of course, are the participating jurisdiction. It's our job to administer that and follow along with that environmental assessment as we're the participating jurisdiction and responsible entity. So we give the developer that option, which we think has worked well in an example from this past year. Otherwise, they can choose to work with us, where we are going to be contracting out with the Wood Group, who's currently under contract, to where we will do the EA through that service. Still walking through it with our weekly or bi-weekly meetings. We're responsible and we're working in heroes. And so just the clarity that CD staff feels that that's the best way to work through these based on capacity and expertise. And we have worked with talking with our HUD home rep about how other municipalities do this. And so the 2 options we have for the developer to do it on their own, where it's a soft cost, which is eligible with the policy. It adds about $2,500 for combining a phase 1 with an EA. Otherwise, we would do that through the Wood Group, who's under contract currently with the city. If we didn't have anyone under contract, I believe we'd have to RFP the environmental assessment every time. So as we've worked through this review from HUD, and again, 5 items or 4 items that were found, 3 of which were from before our times. We're working through this, our capacity, what makes the most sense for projects, et cetera. So that's where we are going to go.
Thank you for the update, Paul. I see Karen has her hand up. Karen, go ahead.
Paul, what is the holdup on the Dodd Meadows?
I might let Nancy discuss that and she's on the call. If I understand it correctly, our HUD environmental review person wants to separate out certain aspects of the build so that certain land can never be built on. So we have to work to get the covenants done for a very odd shaped piece of land. So Ron's been trying to work through that, and it's been very difficult. He's trying to work with his legal folks. It's not something that we would do to draw that out or anything. It wouldn't be our responsibility, but it's been a really long, arduous process these last several months of moving this last step forward. Nancy, anything to add?
It's Ron Lauder is working on getting the covenants in place for the wetlands and the watershed. And so we're just been on hold. Basically, it's been ready to go for probably since January. And so we're just on hold with him working with his legal team and getting it all pulled together.
Okay. The reason I ask is I was the grant administrator for the county and did the environmental review for the Dodd Meadows project for the community facility and the water, sewer, and street improvements back in 2013. And I was surprised to see this to be a concern when an environmental was completed and finalized and release of funds were completed. That project was completed long ago. So I was surprised.
Excellent question, Karen. And I think Nancy will have something to add to that in our work with environmental. Go ahead, Nancy.
So when that was done, the city and the consortium, as the responsible entities, needed to take note about the changes and the revisions with the addition of the community center and the revision to the road layout and the whole subdivision layout. And that was what our environmental rep noted in our finding, was that, so this was years ago. This was like really old. And so basically came back, and then with the addition of the land, what the environmental rep said was that he wanted to do an environmental review for the whole 33 acres. And so we have gotten that done with their environmental firm, which is Alpha Environmental. And then we were just waiting on getting the language in the covenant done and getting that recorded. So we've been walking right along with Ron and, you know, offering our assistance and whatever we can do to help him. But we're on hold until that is completed.
Okay, so
and Karen, we tried to work through this, kind of arguing that we didn't think a full environmental assessment was needed again, but we lost that discussion and had to go back to doing a whole nother full EA for the 33 acres.
Okay, so it wasn't so much the phase that was the water, sewer, streets, and the community center. It was the bigger picture of the entire facility, the entire subdivision site.
It was a combination. It was a trigger that he felt that the city and the consortium needed to acknowledge that piece, and that there hadn't been any amendment with that, with the additional funding. So it was just being aware of what was going on in the project and acknowledging that as well.
Okay, so but because I think the first environmental that was done was the 2013 environmental that was the community center, water, sewer, and street.
Yeah, I think the first environmental, that project's been going since 2011, so 10 years. So, and it has had so many environmental reviews. I mean, it's not that it is lacked at all in this. It just happens to be that our HUD rep has kind of held on this.
Okay, so it's making Linwood happy.
Yes.
Okay. And I understand that. I know him, so.
Thank you.
Know him well. Thank you.
Karen, maybe you should call him and see how happy he's feeling.
I know. I wish I would have known, Karen. We would have had you on our calls, Karen. That would have been good. Maybe we'll bring you in.
Yeah, 20 years of knowing him, so I'm not at all surprised.
Well, let's get Karen on those calls. Andrew, I saw your hand go up.
Right. So I think, yeah, there are two issues here, which is the final closeout of that audit, which is from 2019. And I think we're all probably as anxious as the city staff is to get that wrapped up. It's not ever great to have open audit findings hanging over you, particularly as year after year funding comes in. And, you know, I know Linwood as well. And I know certainly, you know, Linwood is very, very technical and precise in what he wants to see, and can really potentially affect a project if Linwood, you know, for example, in a new award wants to see certain things that can affect the timing of projects. So I think clearing that is something we should, emphasize, and I'm glad you guys are doing that. And then there's the other issue of kind of what we do going forward, and I want to come back to that as well. But I think last thing on the monitoring report, would it possibly be helpful for the board, you know, Karen, me, anyone else who wants to join, as well as city staff in Linwood, to get together and have a call and kind of talk about some of the last items that we need to resolve, and kind of let's get this wrapped up, kind of find how we get to that point. And, you know, we can perhaps discuss that a bit. But the other issue is, I think, the reviews going forward. And you may not recall, Chairman Turner, you were not the chairman at that time, but Julie Mayfield was. And we had a bit of a discussion on this matter last fall and didn't really come to a final agreement on how we were going to proceed, or rather how city staff is going to proceed with our approval for this issue. And I was a little distressed to see that then the spring applications, that was included in the questionnaire for many of the applicants. Are you willing to pay for the environmental review? That dialogue last year, again, with former Councilwoman Mayfield, was that, you know, should the city decide to pursue that, it was going to be something that would affect their admin costs. And I think what I'd like to do is perhaps come to a point on this discussion today, now that we have a public meeting, is is what is our path going forward? What is the board comfortable with and what is the city comfortable with? And I can say, just as my own opinion as a board member, I just want it done promptly and done right so these projects can move forward. If the city doesn't feel that they have the capacity to do that, that's understandable. But I think having kind of a formal idea of what we do is a really good idea. And kind of building on Paul's note earlier, I would not be comfortable with asking developers in particular, but applicants to identify and pay for their own environmental review. I know it's a modest cost, but you know, I've done these things before, and there's an inherent conflict of interest there that could be problematic. I'm not comfortable with that idea. What I am really comfortable with is taking from admin from home and contracting with someone to do that. If it's this group Wood or Land to Sky, let's come up with a plan to just get this done, make it fluid. And I don't know if that's a point of discussion for us today, but from, again, my one board member perspective, I would really like this, you know, again, from admin to contract with an entity that picks up these reviews the minute we make an award, gets them wrapped up. Because, you know, my experience with home, and I think for many folks in here, is that, you know, there's this long lead period, as Mary Brooke mentioned with another issue, but there's a long lead period from the moment we say, let's give money to this project, and then the moment that that project closes and goes to contract. And we have this item, you know, with funding not moving. And this is one of the big pieces of that. And if we can be really, I'd say, intentional and prompt with this, I'd really like to address this today and figure something out, because that will then affect the fall meeting. And, you know, you deal with a lot of developers, Chairman Turner. I mean, a month, 2 months, 3 months in an environment like this, that can mean lumber prices go up. That can fundamentally affect a project. So I really would like to come to a consensus between the board and the city on how we handle this. And I don't know if anyone else wants to speak up, but again, my idea is to be really comfortable with the idea of city staff from home admin contracting with a third-party entity to do the environmental reviews.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'll speak to one thing. Let me just say, the first question, it sounds like Nancy and Paul and perhaps Mary Brooke can gather amongst themselves and see if they need additional support from any board members who would like to welcome them into the conversation with that particular project. I'll leave that on them. It's their choice. But this next one, so what I'm hearing is, you know, I will speak from the developer side. When we carry out environmental testing and studies, the phase 1, all of it, it is easier to combine those efforts. Now, what I'm also hearing is, do we want to pass that additional cost on to those developers? So I guess I'm hearing 3 things. Do we want to pass the cost? Do we want to make sure that it's expedited and efficient so that these projects aren't held up? Because to Andrew's point, holdups are expensive. And do we, if we don't feel that we can handle it in-house, because we also have a capacity problem and have not created any new positions to help with this capacity building, then the third-party option. So I don't know that everybody on this committee has had enough time to even, I mean, this wasn't a particular agenda item to discuss. So I don't know if everybody has the ability to discuss and adequately, you know, create a decision today. But I think it is something we can do on a future agenda meeting. And if there's other comments or kind of questions about, you know, what this means, or if there's other layers we want to add to it in a future discussion, I guess this would be the point.
So if I can respond quickly just to a couple of things, Sage, I appreciate all the offers to help out with Dodd Meadows. Please know that Nancy and I are in pretty constant communication with Ron, just emailing over the weekend about, hey, how's it going with legal? What's up with the covenants? And he is responding back that he's still working through it. So the ball's been in his court, but we are there checking in pretty much weekly or bi-weekly to see what we can do there. And then regarding, we did look and worked with our home HUD rep, Donna Anderson, about this. And regarding the fact of developers seem to like the idea that of the efficiency, moving through quicker, the very low soft cost of $2,500. And what we like about that is it provides the 2 options, and other municipalities do this. And we still, as the participating jurisdiction, and we're responsible for the entities, we don't just turn it over to the environmental folks. We're with them in weekly and bi-weekly meetings, which Nancy can talk about, that we work through them through the entire process, ask questions. We usually have a big meeting towards the end where a few of us are brought in on the call. So we're following along the whole way, but we find that it moves very efficiently. And so far the developers like it. And then we do have the other option where we would do that with a contractor. We do have Wood Group under contract, so that's easier than RFPing, and then we can work through that. What I also like about it is the fact that the environmental review experts, who are the experts and who do this every day versus us once a year, they are in this type of work all the time. They are the experts, noise levels, all those controls, 10 years down the line, etc. So we feel like it's a great opportunity as the participating jurisdiction. I think Sarah Turlinger is on this call. Like within the purview, I don't know if this is something that the consortium votes on with us as our capacity, but we do appreciate the conversation very much. But we have looked to make sure that other municipalities do this, and we feel like we're offering two options, both of which can be moved forward.
Matthew Cable, I saw your hand go up.
I actually just wanted to take a moment and not to sidestep or go backwards here. But I think for the benefit of the public and those who don't work in audits and responses and how that process typically goes, typically you are reviewed in terms of documentation and practices and policies. And then you receive, a letter of findings and a time frame in which to respond. And so, and then you provide a response, right? And so what I think, for the benefit of the public and also for the consortium is just, I think what we're looking for is to not talk about this anymore because, because at some point this should close out, and it's usually a pretty short time frame. And what I think we're looking for is an understanding of, what has been provided, what items remain open in terms of preventing the closing of the findings, right? So we can see that the city staff has taken corrective action. They provided additional documentation. They've modified policies and procedures. They've sought out training for staff. They're looking at different approaches. And I think, what's not clear is we don't have that final closeout letter, right? We're not seeing what's closed, but we're also not 100% clear on what is a remaining open item. Like what is the holdup exactly? And if it's just Dod Meadows, I think getting that clarity, like what has been provided, what has been the feedback from HUD, why isn't it closed yet? And so again, I just wanted to bring up the point about how these processes work and kind of what the normal procedures are. And it sounds like, the city keeps actively moving in this direction, but making sure we understand what the holdup is. And so that we can get this closed.
And I appreciate that, Matt. And so for the synopsis there, it's simply waiting on Dod Meadows to fully close out. And we have, our end has pretty much been done since January. We are waiting on this final part from the developer, and we want to be a good partner to Ron, who's really been in this for many years. And again, that's the last thing we're waiting on to submit what this update is, which is our corrective action letter back to Lenwood. But that is what we're waiting on. And we've even had the discussions that there's only a year left to spend this funding. And we've talked to Ron about that's a concern. Money that's sitting on the table that we, of course, recognize, but balancing that act between being a good partner, working through, some difficulties where, some folks didn't think we even needed to do an environmental assessment again, to Karen's point, on this whole 33 acres, but we were directed to. And so, and that's why for this, we have this review for you all, just as an update that this is where we're at. But the synopsis is waiting on Dod Meadows, trying to be a good partner, not sure when we'll pull the plug, and but trying to make it work for him.
Thank you, Paul. Robin, I saw your hand go up.
Robin, you're muted.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you both. I wanted to say that, one of the things that is most important to me is that we don't consciously or unconsciously do anything to increase the cost of developing affordable housing. That's, for me, that's just basic to everything that we do. I do, though, really appreciate contracting with the Woods Group to get this done. And I think that satisfies the concerns that I've had about environmental reviews being done by city staff and passing on that cost or passing on that cost to developers. So I really appreciate the steps that you've taken in that direction.
I agree, Robin. It sounds like, expeditious, sureness of how to even do this. So a third party does seem like a great thing, because I'm hearing that staff, it's too much, and I'm hearing that we don't want to put it on the developer themselves. So I think that's a good solution. I don't think it's something we need to actually vote on. Andrew, did I see your hand go back up?
Yes, and I'd like to come back to a comment Paul made that I'd like to clarify, and I think it may inform the TBRA issue as well. The point you made, Paul, about Sarah Terwilliger being in the room, and I think kind of verifying that with, I guess, the city clerk's office, is that your interpretation is that regardless of guidance from the board, for example, on the environmental reviews and how we'd like you to conduct them, that decision and that authority is ultimately with city staff, and that is not a board decision. Likewise, with the 20% TBRA issue, I think what we're getting to is a more fundamental dynamic. Your belief is that despite the guidance from the board in the fall, you felt you had the authority to move forward on this issue of passing the cost to developers or the obligation to developers. And I think we want to get a little more clarity on that. Is that on both those matters? Is the thought that the board can perhaps give you input, but the ultimate decision on affecting the use of these funds is city staff? Is that right?
And I might refer.
I was gonna, let me take that call. Andrew, I'll find out as your chair. This is only my third meeting, but I too have these questions. You know, what is the role of this board in this advisory capacity, in this voting capacity? I did inquire a little bit and learned that, you know, traditionally the board has really met twice a year to work on allocation and then reallocation in the fall. And so I'm a little confused as well. And because it seems that we're moving into more frequent meetings, now meeting quarterly, and I saw in an email maybe a request for more often. So what would that look like, you know, and what does that purview look like? I looked at our bylaws and so on, but I need to catch up on that. And I think that is something that perhaps I could start by following up with you on, Andrew, and if it needs to be an agenda item, or perhaps I could issue an update to the consortium. But I think that's probably the next step. I don't want to put everybody on the spot about how to move forward right now, because I don't think there's clarity on those rules, and our own bylaws do not clearly state that. Anybody else have a question on this? Robin, is your hand still up or back up? I can't hear you.
It's back up.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to offer a little bit of historical information that's a little different than what you just shared. And Barbara Volk is not here, so I think I'm probably the person on here who's been around the consortium the longest. And I know that in kind of the 2000s, you know, prior to 2010, the consortium met, I think, bi-monthly, and had a variety of things that they discussed on their agenda, which wasn't always about allocations. I know in my capacity as an attorney at Pisgah Legal Services, I presented to them on fair housing. So I think it was a little different than it is now, and that might have, I don't know the reasons for that, and I don't know that they necessarily matter, but I think that we as a board could decide how often we wanted to meet and what we wanted to talk about. And maybe it's just because I like talking about housing and housing stuff and like talking about it with other smart people. I would love to meet more frequently just so that we can discuss some of these matters that are really important for our communities.
That's
And
great
Sage,
for
if,
perspective.
I
And
can jump
2010
in.
is so long ago. And I can think of several city boards and committees that we could put you on that meet very frequently, if you'd like to. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, just to jump in quickly, I think y'all know just that our commitment from the city side has been, you know, when I first came to the city, it was like just the kind of frantic funding meetings. And I don't know if that was just that time, but we've committed, took a look at the bylaws to be like, let's do these quarterly. We're trying to share as much information out as possible whenever we can, which is we enjoy, and the educational opportunities around what is home funding, how does it work, what's the best way to distribute it, taking a look at who's not spending funding from the past. So we are actually enjoying these other quarterly meetings, the non-funding meetings, as an information sharing to kind of maybe, I don't know, get back to the way it used to be back then, Robin, but possibly, you know, the good discussions that can possibly happen and sharing. And then exactly what the role is on certain things can be figured out. But I know as the participating jurisdiction, you know, we're a responsible entity and hopefully leading a good path here.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm getting a little worried about time because we didn't really set aside time to have this broad discussion. So what I'm going to suggest is that I learn more about the past and the history, and then continue to work with staff on the bylaws and such. And we may actually need this as an agenda item in the future, along with the frequency of meetings. So what it is we are doing, what it is our oversight is, how often we meet, I think is a great future discussion item, but not one we were kind of prepared to have today and didn't notice in that way. So probably not something we should adjust today. Everybody okay with it? Go ahead, Karen.
This is Karen. I would completely agree and request that we have this as at our next meetings, on the next meeting's agenda. I think this is an important conversation that we need to have, particularly when it comes to active projects, so that we can stay on top of projects that are falling behind. I think this would greatly support keeping projects on task and on within their time frame and meeting the project program milestones.
Okay, great, thank you. And there's always ways to do better, right? So I'm going to use this opportunity to restate what I said in my email, which is it is always okay, and I will actually request at this time that if you have things you want as future agenda items or topics or concerns, email me, call me, that's fine, but please do not email the group in a discussive manner, because that is not allowed and can be construed as having public or non-public conversation. And when we are a consortium and we're responsible for doling out funds, it is imperative that we maintain these conversations in the public and in a proper order, so that if there was, if everyone on this commission or consortium wasn't ready to talk about that and we started to move and vote on it or discuss it in an email, it would be very problematic. So let's, if you have things for future agenda items, I'm keeping notes, but if you want to reach out to me directly and have that conversation and suggestions, please do. Okay, so that said, we are moving on to item 4B, which is Vision Properties update. And let's see, Mary Brooke, did you have, this is kind of what we've been talking about, right? Like what happens when a project can't be reached or no longer is going to move forward?
Yeah, so this is great timing for this. Hello again, everyone, Mary Brooke Cox. Vision Properties was awarded home funding for 2 consecutive grant years. So they were awarded in 2018, 2019, and then 2019, 2020. The total of both awards is $60,000. City staff reached out to the developer on several occasions. These 2 projects never went to contract for various reasons. We followed up with the developer, trying to come up with a plan to figure out how to get the money spent in a timely fashion. And unfortunately, the developer cannot meet that timeline. So the money will need to come back to the consortium and be reallocated in September. But we do have an official closeout of both of those grants where they are extended.
So return in September to actually vote on reallocation. We're going to have a busy September meeting. Okay.
And it is interesting, we never, talking about, to Matt Cable's point, which is a good one, about rescinding funds and all this, but I think some of y'all, particularly Sage, have seen our work around CDBG and really trying to guide that funding about who we're awarding, who's got the capacity to move funding and all of that. And it's the same thing here that we've tried to do as well with home funding. That said, it's always rough to be like, sorry, we're going to take, we want to be good partners and take it as far as we can. Dodd Meadows being an example now. Unfortunately, Vision Properties, we could never get to contract. I know several folks know that here. And so it is an interesting line to walk, and we do appreciate the guidance and help on that. It's always tough to pull funding, but it does mean that we need to do our best to make sure information sharing on the front end before we do the awards to a group that might not be able to move a project forward.
Agree. And to Matthew's point earlier, from the very beginning, understanding what that process looks like for both our end and the developer's end will only benefit the project itself. So we've got that on for a next item. We don't need any actual movement on this. This is an FYI on the Vision Properties. Any other questions about that before we move on to the next item? Don't see any hands up. Okay.
I have a question real quick. Do you think we'll have this money available to reallocate at the fall meeting?
I think that's the goal. Yes.
Great.
Okay. Now we are on to item 4C, home policy addendums for clarity. Second round funding and applications. Paul, did you want to speak to this? I mean, we've got some highlighted language. Yeah.
So these we put on for discussion with just some general guidance, with just us city staff trying to think about some things that we notice, especially in the funding and the second round funding, of some clarity of, a loan versus grant, or whether it's the language. In January, I think similar to probably what will happen today. So if we need to set up an all-day meeting in September for a lot of these discussion items, or a half-day meeting because it'll be funding as well, we're just trying to, get guidance from the consortium about, number one, the biggest thing being the second round language, which I think we've come to a good language, a good way to say that, so that when August happens for the second, when the tax credit awards are announced and we have additional funding, which we should, I'm assuming, then we immediately try to go back out with the second round application eligibility. If you all can see in the attachment, the highlighted language, again, we don't have to make this an official addendum at the moment, but this is us just trying to get to a point where this is the language we want to put out for this August if we have additional funding. And we just wanted to see if everyone was comfortable with that. Any suggestions? Matt Cable, I know last year you had a lot of thoughts on this that hopefully we incorporated, and staff really worked on it, but that's our second round language. So that's the first thing I'd like to just see if everyone feels good about in August when the tax credit awards announced and we might have some extra funding. Does this look good? It's really important for us, Sage, to get the word out once we know we have funding, to share that to everybody and to be real clear.
And to be clear, this happens before our next meeting. So this is our chance to discuss. Andrew, I see your hand up.
Yeah. As a general principle, I'm not in favor of placing too many restrictions on what we can consider as far as an application, whether in the first cycle or second cycle. But there are two in particular here I want to kind of point out. One of those is related to the cottages at Oklawaha, which the note says is still kind of struggling to fill out their funding gap. And that is a CHOTO project as well. It's a HAT project. So I wouldn't want to exclude the potential to bring that project back, particularly if we have a CHOTO need. So I wouldn't, it'd be great if we had another CHOTO project, but I'd like to be able to consider that one again if a small reallocation of home funding could bring
Andrew,
that
did
forward.
bullet point 2 cover that? Because we put that in there for bullet point 2 where you're thinking about older projects. So in bullet point 2, projects that were fully funded or previous year projects that have not gone to contract that can show a demonstrated need for additional funding.
Okay. Yeah. I think that may cover it. Hopefully you guys can communicate with HAC that we'd like to see them. I think that's a project.
Yeah, we've been in talk with them.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a project for, I think, developmentally disabled adults, and I think would have a really, really strong impact for that community. The second is, and I saw it, I think, in one of the other documents as well. This was kind of in the preamble, but really don't want to move forward yet with a 20% dedicated to TBRA until we can have, again, just a broader dialogue. And I think in particular with the TBRA resources that are coming into this area right now, the funds that are hung up. And, again, I think a concern I articulated at the last meeting is, I represent Buncombe County, and my immediate and primary concern is Buncombe County, but, some of these other communities may be disadvantaged because they don't have entities that can really access those TBRA funds. And so if we set aside 20%, the Madison, Transylvania, and Henderson folks may be at a slight disadvantage. And I just don't want to see that affect funding before we come to a full decision.
Any Madison, Pennsylvania folks that want to speak to that?
And I know it'll be a great discussion that we have. And unfortunately, our homeless folks couldn't be here because, of course, they want to see as much, TBRA, and we need to get the rental assistance out. But again, we put these out there for just good discussion points for us to figure out. Doesn't have to be figured out today. We always need more time. But it is something that I think, as we try to get guidance on the funding, we appreciate the conversation. So again, to the end game here, if we need to have an all-day meeting in September, Sage, happy to do it.
Forrest, I saw your hand go up.
That sounds good. For Madison County, I know the challenge to have the number of available units, entities to get it out. It's a challenge for us to have that much of the overall funding tied up to something that realistically would not be accessible for us. So I do share those concerns.
Okay. I saw Matthew Cable's hand go up.
Yes. So just to touch on it, I know Paul brought up last year some concerns about, the second round or reallocation piece. And I think what we arrived at during the last discussion is the recognition for city staff not to be in the position of needing to review wholly new applications because of the time constraints, turning those around, taking an in-depth look. If it wasn't in some way restricted, you could be looking at 10 new applications that you've never had to evaluate before, in addition to existing open applications. So I think it is sensible and reasonable, and it looks like what they've described is basically any application that we already have on file, whether that project scope may have changed and require some additional, submittal of documents, or if the scope was as originally proposed and wasn't fully funded. It's basically allowing anyone who's basically existing as a recipient and anyone who didn't receive initially, so who has applied in the last year, to be considered. So I feel like, this language speaks to that and really just preserves staff time to manage things like project oversight and administration and the other aspects of what they have to do, while not taking on another, round of brand new applications. So I didn't take issue necessarily with the language in this one. And I think the TBRA item itself is covered in the loans and grants, which we haven't gotten to yet. So I'll speak to that kind of when we're on that item.
Great, thanks. Ben Woody?
So I know we're all kind of jumping around a little bit here. It's a good conversation, but I do want to add a couple of comments about the TBRA. First, it is a priority in our consolidated plan. I think it was deemed a high priority. If I'm wrong, Paul or staff, correct me on that, but I don't have the plan in front of me, but I feel like it was a priority as part of that plan we've adopted. I don't know that 20% is the right number necessarily, and I understand the other jurisdictions have different needs, but I also know that TBRA is a useful funding stream. And Asheville, obviously, we have to deal with the brunt, our community does, of homelessness and some of those issues. So I do like the idea of, since that is a priority in the plan, having some acknowledgement or trying to fund some of those requests and maybe a policy supporting that. Again, maybe 20% is not the exact right number, but I just want to, I feel like I need to say that is a really big issue in the community, in our community. It's something that I just want to make sure that we don't totally discount, and nobody on this call is going to do that. I just felt like I needed to say that in this meeting. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Ben. Anyone else? Donna?
Good afternoon. Actually, it's still morning. Ben's correct. The consolidated plan was a huge process with public meetings, and to modify that, you'd have to go back and do all those public meetings all over again, because it would be a significant modification to your plan. So this really would be a discussion for the next time when you redo your plan, not really stopping in midstream and trying to reinvent a program that the community already bought into. So I'm here on an advisory capacity, but I'm trying to save you a lot of time and effort at the same time. So it's not really the time for that.
I appreciate that advice, Donna. Forrest, go ahead.
Well, as someone coming from a unit and having worked for 2 units without the capacity to even keep up with all the issues as well as we have, I understand that it's one of the most efficient ways. When you have people willing to do it and a place to go, it's a good way to spend the money, and it's valuable. I do understand that. I don't think a consolidated plan, and I may be mistaken, sets out a specific percentage. If I'm wrong, tell me. So I don't think it's inappropriate for us to, I'm not saying throw it out. I'm saying to set aside that much of the money for something that it sounds like we're having a challenge. To scale, we're all kind of in the same boat. It's hard to say for sure. That concerns me, but I understand what we need to do, but to say now's not the time, you know, I'm not okay with that.
Thank you, Forrest. Any other questions or comments? So this comes up in August, right? I'm wondering if the best thing to do here, because of the timing, is for me to follow up with your individual communities like you, Forrest, who may not be able to apply this in the way that we're applying it to your community, and just to further discuss it and see if there's something that we can relay back to staff around 20% versus 18% or 15%, or what that might look like. Is everyone comfortable with that? Because I don't think we're going to be able to flush this out today.
And Sage, Paul here again. If to make a recommendation, you know, we do have the funding meeting in September, and summertime, I guess, when people are getting back out there. But perhaps these two issues, again, where we look at you all for policy guidance here, that, you know, perhaps these two items, whether it's you know, the TBRA or loan versus grant, we could really ask everyone to take a look at those and be prepared to speak on them in September. I know everyone's super busy, and we had this in January and there wasn't enough time, and it's never enough time. But I do think, you know, I feel good about the second round language. I think, again, repeating myself, if the homeless folks were here, they would fight for TBRA. I think the overall message is we need more landlords to accept tenant-based rental assistance across our consortium. And then also, you know, what constitutes a loan and a grant, where we're trying to understand, you know, home funds in general are to be paid back, but we do feel there's some opportunity for some grant opportunities there. So not sure what you think there, but again, if we did a half day or full day meeting in September, you know, maybe everyone could bring back their points and we could decide or not decide and leave, like, for example, hey, we're going to look at all the applications every year and look at who's got the best application, whether it's TBRA or not, while remembering our priorities. So just a thought there based on time.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the September meeting and the length of it and the many important items that will be on it. It's making me wonder, to Robin's point, if occasionally we need an additional meeting to really look at procedure, you know, how we operate, what the policies are, when to, you know, something I'm thinking about. If we get to that point with adding so many items, we might need to do that. Any other questions on this topic before we move on? Matthew, go ahead.
So I guess, you know, and this gets back to one of the points that was made earlier about roles and responsibilities between the city and the consortium members. So, you know, we received these documents, and it doesn't sound like anyone's ready to move forward. And I'll just touch on the TBRA aspect briefly, which is, I'm not in favor of having any set aside for any particular type of sub-program. Not that that program doesn't merit being recognized, but our job is to evaluate programs on their merits in comparison to each other, because we have a limited amount of funding, you know, that we can allocate, and kind of tying our hands in terms of saying at minimum every year, $250,000 is going to go to this type of project means that where it's warranted, we can't reallocate that somewhere else, right? But, you know, I think with these items going forward, particularly if we know what action it is that we're asked to take, right? If city staff is sending this item forward to us, is that in our purview? So this speaks to that larger item of what are we in charge of versus what, you know, is delegated as kind of the admin arms capacity. But if we're being asked to take an action on an item, getting real clarity on what the action is that is requested. And then finally, I'll just say that I think an additional meeting might be warranted, because talking about the number of items that we've already said we'd like to bring back, and trying to do that in the same time frame for looking at reallocating money, that exercise in itself is exhausting, the allocation exercise. So I don't know that we could handle all of those. And that would be also for the benefit of the public. I mean, their ability to dedicate that much time to follow what's happening with this group would also be somewhat limited. So I think an additional meeting might be beneficial to talk about these things, these items as well. I'm
tending to get there with you. I appreciate that input, Matthew. And even thinking on this end that when creating an agenda, I can do better to isolate items like this needs action, this is info only, etc. So let me just do a little kind of, some of you have your videos on, some of you don't, or maybe that's just my connection, but if you can just kind of throw up your hand about, do you think we should have an extra meeting in August? And you could visually throw your hand or digitally throw your hand. Everybody be okay? Yeah, so I'm sensing that. Okay, I'm gonna, it's not as simple as just saying we'll do that because it's virtual and there are schedules and timing and, you know, all this publication and production behind the scenes. So I will be in touch about that and throw out potential dates and a better draft agenda on all these things that we're discussing today, okay? All right, I think that moves us on. I don't see any other hands up. We're going to move on to the next item, which is item 4C2, loan versus grant. And let's see.
I think that kind of falls into the bigger picture conversation.
It does. It might just be something we take farther down the road. It's just all, it's policy, basically. Okay. I think I'm going to keep us moving because we're going to be out of time in 20 minutes. And we've got a couple big things left. Going to move us to item 5, new business, the updated consortium agreements with Mars Hill and Marshall.
Sure. So Paul here again with City of Asheville. So I think all of you have heard this, and it was in January, I think, that we were informed that Mars Hill and Marshall were not added properly to the consortium back in 2013. Before our time. So we've been working on trying to figure out exactly how to add them. This did hit priority on our desk, and Christina Harris has been helping with this. We've been working with our legal team as well. And the idea is just to correct that. We're in process right now. Christina?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So we have received the amended agreement from Town of Marshall, and I'm working with Karen Kina for Mars Hill as we speak to receive that. We do, however, have a bit of a delay in our schedule because here at the city, we are doing end of year closeouts in Munis, which is kind of the host that we can put this amendment into. So we won't be able to initiate the completion of these officially until after the new year. So, but we are definitely working on it. We are definitely a lot closer than we were before. And, you know, we'll just keep you all posted on what we're doing with that.
So what I can add to that, Christina, is the Town of Mars Hill, who is the board that will approve the appointment, that will be signing it. I spoke with Mars Hill. Last week's agenda was specifically about approving the new year budget. So we were not able to get onto that agenda. They will not be having a July meeting because they had 2 meetings in the month of June. It is on their agenda for the meeting in August.
Okay, thank you so much, Karen, for that update. I have it noted.
And then Sage, just quickly, I think it's next spring, like usually spring of 2022, that we have to renew our membership with the consortium. I think it's every 3 years. We're under auto renew, but I think we will be looking at the overall agreements just to make it simpler. It had something to do with the fact that to add a new consortium, like everyone had to sign off on it individually. And we're just working on changing all that with our legal and working with our HUD rep. So more to come, but right now we'll get Mars Hill and Marshall added properly and then fix all this for the spring.
That sounds great. Thank you. All right. Another exciting one, item 5B, home and what we're calling, I hear all different types of names, ARPA, ARP, rescue. I call it ARPA. So home and ARPA awards.
Correct. So we got a notification from HUD, I'm sure, with all the ARPA funds coming down, that $4.7 million will be coming down in home funding. So I've attached the award letter, as well as how the National Community Development Association, who've really upped their game, by the way, as an organization, kind of shared out money in general that's coming down to community development and in housing and all of that. So 2 really good reads there in sharing information. Regarding the $4.7 million, we had a meeting with our HUD rep, I think it was in the second or third week in May, about this funding to recognize it in our annual action plan. So when we're aware of funding coming our way, we're supposed to recognize it, even if we don't know what's going to happen with it in our annual action plan. But in reaching out to Taslim, she advised us not to recognize that funding, even as a notation that this money is coming our way, because there's no guidance around this funding as of yet. So she let us know that the funding guidance should be happening sometime in August or September, where we actually figure out what we can do with this money, what that looks like, et cetera. What I do know at this time is that if you read that letter, it's going to be for the benefit of homeless. I have recently heard, but not confirmed this myself, that it'll be all grant funding, and we will have 2030 until 2030 to spend this. I'm assuming, but I don't want to assume, that it's going to come to the consortium. I'm assuming that's a yes. I assume once we get the guidance in August or September that we're going to have to come up possibly with a whole process around new applications and figure all of that out. There was a HUD meeting that I think I signed up for July 1st. It's kind of the first meeting on this funding. I don't know if they're going to have all the guidance sewed up that day. I don't anticipate that. But we're just following this, and so more to come. We are waiting for the guidance of exactly how this money can be spent, and we assume this will be a good probably 6-month process to figure out how to get applications in, maybe by the end of the year. I don't know yet. As we find out, we'll do our best for updates.
Thanks, Paul. And this is a significant amount of money, and I appreciate you sharing the letter. I know I received an email about the timeliness, so I will own that as chair, it actually did not occur to me to inform everyone of this letter, all right, because I knew behind the scenes we were still kind of forming what this could look like, what the allocation rules would be. So I apologize for that, and I think it's one of the things that communication in general that we can talk about in roles and responsibilities in this August special meeting. I agree, Paul, that it's almost feels like a separate process because it's a one-off experience. So defining what that looks like, and I'm happy to see the uses of this funding. It's a pretty extensive list and very applicable to the current need, at least in the community that I'm in. Any questions or comments about this from anyone, or excitement? Go ahead, Andrew.
I have a brief question, and it kind of informs one of the things that Buncombe County has been saying, but is this money available potentially immediately? You know, I know Rachel Nygaard likes to say it's already hit our account, but, you know, if we were to have a process and an award funds, you know, I know that there was the Citizen Times article this week about domestic violence service providers and the lack of funding that they've experienced. I think it was VAWA or VOCA, but I think there may be some of these uses, like the supportive services, that maybe have a little more of an urgency behind them. I'm curious, maybe in that August meeting, we can talk about when exactly these funds will be available. And then, you know, a question that's come up with our ARPA funds, and I don't know if we have the guidance yet as well, but it would be interesting. Do these funds carry the full kind of raft of federal compliance requirements? Would you have to do an environmental review? Would you have to do, you know, that could affect the use as well, but that's going to be a curious matter because, you know, for example, if they require an environmental review, a project that was a helpmate, a new shelter, that could extend that years or months down the line, and they may not be interested. But yeah, otherwise it's very exciting, and those are just a few items I think, you know, we'll wait for the HUD guidance on.
And all very similar questions, so many unknowns, which is why we were hesitant to just shoot it right out of the gate back in April, because we don't know. I mean, I know 4.7, it hasn't hit our accounts. Benefit Homeless Grant 2030, and then the 2030 is interesting because they really wanted to be targeted to the immediate needs, yet they gave us till 2030. So that's confusing on how that works. So, hey, if y'all hear anything as well, but I believe July 1st is the first meeting I've seen from HUD Exchange to talk about this funding. So hopefully we'll find out more.
And I think, you know, Andrew and I had a chance to talk before the meeting and catch up, but one of the things we talked about was, you know, for transparency reasons and community and partnership reasons, can we kind of create a bit of a timeline, and knowing it might change, but, you know, when we might receive the money, when we're trying to define how we'll allocate it, when this board's going to meet about it and discuss, when it might be available to the community and partners and so on, just so we have a clear picture. I know it would help me, but I think it would also help the consortium and partners out in the community. And I think that's
And
something
just
we
no
can.
guidance right
Yeah.
now, though, say, to answer that, just we don't know.
Right. But I mean, as we learn to try and dial in on that and then report back to the consortium, so we have just more information. I'm realizing we need, if we're only going to meet quarterly, then I can be updating you monthly, perhaps, as things that are happening in between sessions and meetings. Any other comments or questions about this particular item?
I will just add that I do think, and we've discussed this about the various funding sources that are becoming available. What this presents is an opportunity perhaps to be an influx of funding for some of those programs that we find it difficult to balance within our regular allocations of home awards. So I'm hopeful that this will allow us to really target some very specific activities and really allow for the home funds perhaps to focus on some of the more construction-based programming. It's what it sounds like it will likely do, and that's what we've seen with a lot of the other funding, is that it can help with a lot of program support. So I'm generally positive and hopeful about what we see as final guidance. Hopefully, like some of other programs, we're not relying on FAQ sheets to guide us initially, but we'll see.
Yep. It's interesting to have the money without the plan. We usually have the plan without the money. So we're all learning and we're stuck in this timeline, but we're going to get there together. Robin, I saw your point in the chat. I'm glad you're excited. I'm very excited. I was thrilled to learn this information, and gives me great hope that our federal government is kind of paying more attention to these issues, whether it was in response to a pandemic or an ongoing need that the pandemic just exacerbated. Any other questions, comments about this item? We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that we leave room for public comment. There is a summary from the NCDA on there if you didn't get a look. It's a huge 5-page document. It feels like it could be so much more informative, but that's what we have right now. Okay, we are moving on to public comment. I know we didn't have any emailed in. Christina, did we have anybody on the line?
No, we do not have anyone in the queue for public comment.
Thousands of people watching this, y'all. Just kidding. All right, so last item, number 7, is our quarterly meeting schedule. These are the dates we're going to have you to hold on your calendar. And then I'm going to be in touch via email about a potential special meeting in August to go over some of the items we discussed today.
So, Sage, to that point, and we do appreciate everyone taking a look at those dates and putting them on their calendar. Do you want us to change that to an all-day meeting in September for this group so that we can tackle the funding and also like a couple other items, and we can change that to all day? I think community development can clear their schedules, or I can.
All day sounds pretty intense. How about we see what happens with the special meeting in August for some of these items that allows us to potentially just focus on reallocation in September? Sound good? Okay. And Paul, I'll be in touch with you about that. Otherwise, folks, keep these dates on your calendars, and pending any other comments or questions, we can adjourn. Anyone else? Okay, once again, I just want to remind everybody to please not deliberate or discuss over email. Everything we should be doing is in the public realm, especially when we are doling out large amounts of money and community assistance. So if you have anything from today's meeting that you want to add, afterthoughts and stuff, go ahead and email them to me, and happy to take phone calls and, get everybody around. Go ahead, Paul.
I just wanted to say, just remind everybody at the bottom there is a way to keep informed, particularly the community development updates, to sign up for those. We don't kill your inbox, but it's community development's way of sharing information, some interesting stuff, partner stuff, opportunities for funding. A lot of the stuff like regarding the second round of funding, we communicate through there. So it's easy to sign up for our community development updates with that link.
It's a very thorough update. I appreciate reading it and the ongoing nature of its updates. It also details sometimes things like when we have doled out rental assistance in the past, how far into that funding are we? How much is left? How's it going? So there's a lot of good information in there. And if your community is not doing something similar, I suggest you do. All right. I think that's it, everyone. And we're 5 minutes early. I appreciate everyone's time today. And I will be in touch about August. All right. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned. Have a great day.